Okay, so this slide presentation is about writing your grants and how to do it well. So I try to put a spin on this because I know no one wants to get an F. So I'm going to talk about how to get an F. So if you wanted to fail, I'm going to go over the things you should do. And in reality, if you don't want to fail, you should not do these things. So if you wanted to fail, one of the ways to do that is to take all of your papers and copy and paste them together versus reading over them and putting together the way that they should go. If you copy and paste all your papers together, if you think about it, there are parts of your paper that are repeated in several of the papers. There are times throughout the semester where you've changed objectives or risk factors or populations. And so if all you do is copy and paste your papers together, they won't make any sense. The second item is if you want to fail, you should ignore all the feedback given to you and do not fix any errors that have been addressed. Another way to fail is to ignore APA. All the feedback that you've gotten on APA, just ignore it and keep doing it the wrong way, and that will also possibly cause you to fail. And another way to fail is to ignore all the spelling and grammar errors that you've made and do not correct them. Since most people don't want to fail, then I encourage you to take care of all the items that have been addressed on the prior slide. And then let's get started. The most important thing to do is to start to write or start to revise and pull your papers together. So these are the parts of the grant. Part 1A is the largest part of your grant. It's the needs assessment and background information. Excuse me, what it does is it combines your needs assessment and community analysis into one paper. In this section of the paper, you're going to take the national data. You're going to start at the national level. You're going to state the problem. You're going to explain the problem with data. You're going to identify the risk factors and then talk about the secondary data as it relates to each of your risk factors, very much like you did in your needs assessment. Then you're going to move to your local community. So you have to define your local community, describe your local community, and identify the risk factors that you're going to use in your program. For each risk factor, you're going to give secondary data and then primary data. So you're going to first say the risk factor is X, give the secondary risk factor for your community and risk factor X, and then explain your primary data collection that you would conduct for that one risk factor. You do one risk factor at a time. If you think back to it, in your community analysis, you had to explain how you will collect the primary data so that it makes sense for your population and your program. And I'm looking to see if you've used patch or map, and that's because that's how planning is done. So if you do everything the way you're supposed to, patch or map will automatically occur. You don't need to say, here's what I've done. And then make sure your logic model is there and it's completed. The second part, part 1B, is the purpose. This is where you copy and paste the purpose, outcomes, or goals of your grant. Each of your grants calls them something different. We're looking at those goals that you've been using all semester for your planning. The next part is called 1C, and this is the implementation plan. In the implementation plan, first you will describe your program briefly in 2 to 3 paragraphs, like you did in your theory and rationale paper. You will identify a model, maybe 2, that support your program, like you did in your theory and rationale paper. And you're going to make sure you describe the theory or model in detail and how it relates to your program. The next part of the implementation is the 3-column chart. Some people make this an appendix. It has to be in landscape format, not portrait. So you will get graded on this. Do you have the correct chart? Do you have your goals? And so for each chart, you'll have the grant goal and the community goal. You'll have one goal per chart, one type of objective per row. Are your objectives SMART objectives? Do the objectives, activities, and strategies align with each other? And does everything match the goal and your grant's purpose? This is what you did in your implementation evaluation paper. Your work plan is who is doing what by when, with the third column empty. That also goes in this section. And your Excel timeline will go into the appendices. Remember, whatever format you use for your work plan, you have to use for your Excel sheet. So if you have if you have the planning phase of your grant, then you have the day that you get your grant, and then you have an evaluation phase. That's one way to set it up. The other one is year 1, year 2, and year 3. Whichever one you choose for the work plan, your Excel timeline has to be the same. So that takes us to part 1D, evaluation, and this is very much like your implementation and evaluation paper. You have to have a brief narrative of the evaluation strategies. Those evaluation strategies come from the third column of your planning chart. And what I recommend to people is that they talk about goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, etc. So here is goal 1, here's how I would evaluate it. Here's goal 2, here's how it will be evaluated, etc. Something new that you have not done yet is you must have 2 to 4 samples of evaluation tools. Whoops. So these 2 to 4 samples, you're going to list the goal and objective, and then you're going to show a sample of the tool. I'm looking to see that do you have the tool and does it match the objective. So if you say you're going to do a Likert scale, then you would put the goal, the objective, and several questions of the Likert scale with the possible answers to show me that what you've thought of. If you're doing a sign-in sheet, I would need a copy of the goal, the objective, and the sign-in sheet. If you're doing a knowledge test or a skill check-off or an observation, you need the goal, the objective, and the form that you're going to use for whatever the evaluation is. You need 2 to 4 samples. Your capacity is section 2A. And your capacity, you're proving that you can make this program a success. So you're going to explain in 1 to 2 pages, hopefully 1, what resources you need, people and things and places. You've done that several times in the class. Then these next items you have not done before, but they're not hard to do. The first one is that you're going to explain the existing relationship you have with the population. This is made up. So if you're doing a program in Alaska, in Anchorage, Alaska, you need to explain how this organization to which you belong has a relationship with the population. Perhaps you've run other programs in the community. Perhaps you serve on advisory boards in the community. Then you need to explain existing relationships with other organizations. So if you're doing suicide prevention in Anchorage, Alaska, okay, so what other organizations have you worked with in Anchorage, Alaska? Have you done maybe a fitness program there? Okay, what organizations did you work with? Have you done a teen pregnancy prevention program in Anchorage, Alaska? What other organizations have you worked with? The organizations that you use must be named, and they must be in that community because I will check. Then you have to have an advisory board list with a brief description of who's on the advisory board. I do not want names. I want titles. So, for example, the chairperson of the suicide prevention program, or a community outreach worker from Planned Parenthood, or a teen pregnancy prevention worker from the health department, 2 teachers from the name of the high school, an administrator from the name of the elementary school, a nurse from whatever health clinic. So an advisory board is a list of people who will advise you on decisions that you're making in your program. Advisory boards do not get paid. People do it voluntarily because it looks good for their resume, and also they often have an interest in it. So if you're on an advisory, the people on the advisory board need to be somehow connected to your topic, to your program. And then you'll put a 1-paragraph summary, which you've already done this, summarizing your capacity as to why you can make this happen. Section 2B are your budgets. These will be appendices. You have the budget and the budget narrative. Remember, they have to match. They must be close but not over the total amount of the grant, and there cannot be errors in your math. This should all be relatively easy because you've already submitted it and had things corrected and suggestions made. The appendices, you have your timeline Excel, budget sheets, and you have your Excel spreadsheet, timeline, and you have your 2 budgets. So you would have appendices that are Excel documents. Then remember, you have a page limit to your grant. So if you are only allowed 20 double-spaced pages and you have 25, you need to move something into appendices. These are some examples of what could move into an appendix. You have your evaluation examples. You have your advisory board. You have your planning chart. So any of those, or your timeline, any of those items could go into your appendices. Typically, there are no page limits on appendices, or the page limits are extremely high. So if you need more room in your grant because you have too many pages, then you'll move some things to appendices. However, the Excel sheets must be appendices. So what's important for you to understand is you get 15% of your grade from your formatting, which means if nothing else is right, you'll at least have 15% on your grant. So are you using the correct size of font, the correct type of font? Is the spacing correct? Are your margins correct? Are the number of pages correct? Those are all in your grant online assignment 2, where we talked about what are the requirements. Is your reference list submitted separately? I want to be able to open both items at the same time so I can look at your reference list in Blackboard and your paper separately. Your APA requires a title page. It no longer requires a running head if you're using APA 7. APA 6 does. If you're not sure, Google how to do an APA paper, preferably an APA 7, or you can use 6. I'm fine either way. Just make it consistent. And make sure your spelling and grammar is correct. Make sure your APA is correct. Left justification means that everything is justified to the left. So the items at the top here, all of those items that go all the way to the left, that's left justification. Some of you are justifying full page. That's incorrect, and you will lose points for that. And remember, the first letter after a colon in APA is always uppercase. So here we go as a summary. Make sure you correct your errors. Make sure everything aligns, meaning your goals, your objectives, your activities, your evaluations all align with each other. Pay attention to formatting and pay attention to details, and you will do fine. Also in Blackboard, there is a step-by-step list of what everything should be in your grant. If you follow that, you should get a very good grade. So that's the end of this lecture. I look forward to reading your grants.